My name is Alan Connolly, and if you've never heard of me before, this is probably a reason. It's because I'm a nobody. Uh, but no, born and raised in Chicago, Illinois. I am a product of an educator who was an educator in the Chicago public school system for over 30 years. And I spent majority of my life trying to do something that was the total opposite of what my mother did. And so that included preaching. Preaching to me was too synonymous with teaching, so I didn't want to preach, and I tried to run from my calling. Unfortunately, at the age of 16, God had me having these dreams for about 6 weeks straight where I would not sleep, and I just saw myself preaching and laying hands on people, and eventually I said, God, I give up. I accept my call to preach. And that started my journey from there, and I'm still learning today. But I've shared with some people that after I accepted my call, I wanted to enlarge my academic bandwidth as it related to the Bible and studying the Bible. I wanted to become a learned exegete, right? That was my goal. So I'm reading Kierkegaard even before I enter into seminary and all of these things. And one day, someone asked me, Alan, would you be interested in participating in what's called the Taste of Seminary? And this was at the McCormick Theological Seminary here in Chicago. So I went to Taste of Seminary. I spent the week there. This was after I graduated from Trinity International University, which is it's a conservative institution, right? And people were trying to get me to go to Moody, and nothing against my friends at Moody and other institutions, but I wanted to go somewhere that was more in alignment with where I felt God was taking me. And I didn't plan to open up with all of this, so bear with me. But I felt like this is going to help lend to some great context, especially for those of you online. I remember reading when Jesus sent out the disciples. He said that, I'm sending you to go out into all the world. Well, I grew up in church my entire life. And so for me, I thought that, okay, I go to seminary and I become a learned exegete. I'll be able to go and hang with all of the religious elite, and I'll be able to just use all the good theological jargon and all of that good stuff, right? But then God had this plan. How many know God is a humorous God? God ended up having someone reach out to me, just like they reached out to me about seminary, about McCormick Theological Seminary. They reached out to me about a position in the Chicago public school system. Now, mind you, I just told you I spent most of my life running away from anything that looked like what my mother did. So I felt like, well, okay, I became a preacher, but I still didn't become a teacher. So I'm winning here. Nope. Now I end up, Alan, there's this position at Chicago Public Schools that we think it'll be great for you. We think that is actually tailored for you. And they thought this because in ministry, the church where I was serving at the time was Apostolic Church of God, which is on the south side of Chicago. It's the largest African-American Pentecostal church in the city of Chicago, actually. But my whole mindset was always outreach. I was always outward focused in how I did ministry. I didn't want to work inside out. I wanted to work outside in. And what I meant by that was doing food distribution drives and coat drives. And I was a part of the Feeding the Homeless ministry. Everyone else just thought I was a preacher at the church, but they didn't know that I was working in these other ministries outside in the street. That's where my heart was. My heart was always and will always be with the least, the last, the lost, and the little. So I'm like, what is this position at CPS? I said, Alan, we have an Office of Faith-Based Initiatives. It's an Office of Faith-Based Initiatives in Chicago Public Schools? Like, what is it? Is it chaplaincy work? It's like, no, it's not chaplaincy work. As a matter of fact, we don't promote faith. So why is it called Office of Faith-Based Initiatives? Well, we work with faith-based partners to support the school system. I said, well, can you send me something to read that I can look at? Because this is not making sense to me. I'm like, what about the separation between church and state? Alan, I'm telling you, this gentleman who I'm talking about, and he doesn't mind me sharing his name. His name is Chip Johnson. He's Dr. Chip Johnson now. Chip was an educator. He also was a network chief. He also was a minister of music at the church where I was serving. But while he was in Chicago Public Schools, he understood that we needed something else that would help bridge these gaps that often exist between the school system and the faith community, because the faith community has always been the backbone to society, right? And so in the community where my church is, there's also a school down the street, but let me tell you this, only about 2% of those young people in that school actually attended our church. And this is what started this ethos that I have now in philosophy as it relates to church or the faith community in our schools. So let me tell you a little bit now about this work that I do at CPS first. So this mission for the Office of Faith-Based is to establish effective partnerships with the faith-based institutions citywide. And we understand that the role of faith-based leaders as valuable resources, and know that these partnerships actively engage the community and contributes towards the success of our students and the schools. And we'll get into how that, because like I said, and you heard in the video last night, I know you're asking, well, how does this contribute to the success? We're going to talk about that. We have this program. One of the initiatives that's ran out of my office is called Safe Haven. And the Safe Haven program is where churches can respond to an RFQ. And this RFQ, if they respond successfully, they can become what's called a Safe Haven vendor, which permits them to do after-school programming right in their facilities. The after-school program takes place when school lets out. And some of you all who have children, you know that, especially if you have little ones, when school lets out, it's a whole lot being let out other than just the students. That energy that was pent up is being let out, and they're looking for somewhere to go to be safe. And I will say this, in Chicago, this particular program was initiated when we experienced a spike in violence in the city. And I will say that those of you who are from out of town, you came to Chicago, you don't have to tell nobody. I already know. You were wondering, is Chicago as violent as they say it is? It is. However, we know that God is in control. And even though that this city has experienced a spike in violence even since the pandemic, what we have also seen, and you all have heard this throughout the pandemic, there's this word that you heard all the time, but during the pandemic, you heard it more than any other time. Anyone can take a guess at that word? Pivot, okay. Starts with an E. Okay, I heard enrich. Do you remember when the pandemic we first got word about it and everyone started to go out to the stores? They went out to get what? Toilet paper. They went to go get what was essential. So, and I also made a joke about this, that all of the folk who went out to get the toilet tissue probably are the same folk who didn't get vaccinated, but that's another story. But one thing that we learned about the pandemic is what was essential to us and what was not. But I shared this with a few faith leaders, is that it's one thing to not be on the government's essential list, but it's another to not be on your community's essential list. And the churches that were indeed essential to the community are the churches that are now still thriving. And not just churches, but businesses. If your business was indeed essential, or the community deemed it to be essential, that business is still thriving. When the schools shut down here in Chicago, the Office of Faith-Based Initiatives remained essential to the community because of this particular program called Safe Haven. because even though the schools were shut down, we still had, and I was sharing with someone earlier in the room, that we still needed help with our young people to engage in remote learning, because many of our students didn't have parents in their homes who were technologically savvy enough to help them in their remote learning. So what we did was we said, well, we have 47 safe haven vendors around the city. What if we allowed them to set up and become remote learning hubs, where now during the day, when mom and dad, if they have to go to work, or if they feel like they can't get work done at home because the kids are at home with them, then maybe they can go to this remote learning site and get the adequate assistance that they need in order to do their schoolwork. That's what the Safe Haven program is all about. It's about bridging those gaps that exist between the school system and the faith community, and utilizing or leveraging our partnerships with the faith community to assist in our children's academic experience. Spring break. When the children get out of school for that 1 week of spring break, and you like, I need a break from my kids. The Safe Haven program operates during that week, during the day. So it's the opposite of the after school. It operates during the day from 10 a.m. until 2 p.m. And some churches open up their doors earlier, and some stay later. And it all depends too upon the amenities that they have. There are some churches, that have a gymnasium, right? They're going to attract so many young people. And then there are some churches, they may not have the gymnasium, but they have some youthful workers, and they know how to build those relationships with those young people. And then we have summer programming. Summer programming operates for 6 weeks in the summer from 10 a.m. until 2 p.m. And these are all in churches. All right. We also do emergency response. The emergency response is when, for instance, if there's a strike or if there's this natural disaster, something happens, we ask churches to set up their sites to be an emergency site, like we did with the remote learning hubs. But we had to do this recently when there was a teacher strike. And you all heard about Chicago Teachers Union. Now, I believe in unions. However, I don't believe in impacting students' learnings just over foolishness. Now, we experienced this during the pandemic because some people were saying that schools weren't safe. Well, the science, the data showed that the spikes in the COVID cases, it wasn't taking place in the schools. So why impact the young people's learning because of a political agenda? And I'm not going to get off into that, but we needed emergency sites. And our Safe Haven sites stepped up to the plate, and our young people had a place to go to continue to learn. We also do crisis support, which is a part of the work that I'm not thrilled about. And I know it, depending on where you live, it's going to be different, right? Crises may be a little bit different. But I also believe that crises is the incubator for creativity. And since we were in this pandemic, our work shifted. But crisis support had always remained the same, because whenever a young person passes away, we respond to it and we offer words of comfort. Now, we understand that our district is diverse. We have faculty, we have family that are, they subscribe to a myriad of faiths. And so we don't use this as an opportunity to proselytize. We use this as an opportunity to be relational. And that's why I often tell people that God is not religious. God is relational. So though I am a Christian, this is an opportunity for me to be relatable with someone who may not be a Christian. They may be Buddhist. They may be Islamic. They may subscribe to the Islamic faith. They may be Baha'i. When you're bereaved, you just want someone to give you some kind words. And I tell you, just yesterday, we had a mother, some of you may have seen the news, but she had a 15-year-old son who was shot and killed walking home from school. And the principal, they called me and they're asking me to come by the school. They just want me to stop by, just be present. And I'm telling you how my work has shifted. They didn't know that we had an Office of Faith-Based Initiatives. Someone told me that earlier today, that they didn't know that here in Chicago, just like I didn't know when they reached out to me about this position. Well, now we have this principal who someone tells her about this office, and she asked me to come by the school. And so I asked her while I was there if she could call the mother while I'm with her. She calls the mother, and I tell her who I am, and I let her know. I said, I am clergy, so if you would like for me to pray with you, I can do so. The moment I said that, this woman broke down in tears. You could hear her weeping over the phone. And then you could hear that small yes come through the phone. And I prayed with her, but that meant the world to her. And at that moment, this has happened several times, but yesterday, it dawned on me that people, even if you have not been going to church, even if you haven't been praying, even if you haven't felt like you've been doing the will of God, when your faith gets tested, God has a way of drawing you back in. And I tell you, one of the best ways to do it is just through simple words of comfort. Words of comfort matters. We also help with funeral expenses. So if that family, if they don't have insurance, we will help them with up to $1,000. And I know you're saying it's not a lot of money, and it's not, but it helps a poor family who doesn't have that, they don't have insurance or other means of income. That $1,000 helps with the funeral expenses, the burial expenses, but we also connect them to counselors, because long after that loved one has been laid to rest, that mom, the siblings, the rest of the family, they're going to need counseling. And right now, our district is working diligently to become a more trauma-engaged and informed district. And so now we're working on ways to help families become more resilient and understand what trauma is, but also how to heal from that trauma. We also have this initiative called Adopt a School. Now I'm almost done with just laying out what we do out of this office. With the Adopt a School initiative, this is where we allow the faith community to get paired up to one school right there in that community where they serve. And it works best if that school is congruent to the ministry. Now they have to be sponsored in to become a vendor. And I omitted to say this about the Safe Haven program. Churches are compensated for their work as a Safe Haven vendor. So they get $250 a day for after school spring break. Summer, they get $350 a day. It's not a lot of money, but if you're a church, it can help offset some of that cost and help you with your budget. Adopt a School is different. There is no compensation. This is a no cost agreement. But what does it do? It cultivates genuine relationship between the school and the faith community. And what we ask them to do is come up with a maximum of 3 programs that they will do, or projects that they will do in collaboration with the school. One of them can be a coat drive. Another project can be a food drive. Another project can be just mentoring the students. Another project can be just being present at the school during award presentations or Teachers Appreciation Week. Just little small things like that lets the students and the families know that there is a group of people, a village of people, a community of people that care about them outside of the school. It's all about cultivating relationship. The truancy remediation, I was talking with someone about the disengagement of our students here in Chicago Public Schools, and wherever city you're from, you may be experiencing this as well. But Chicago Public Schools experienced a 20% drop right when the pandemic started. And a lot of this was attributed to the fact that people were at home and they weren't ready to go back out. It's hard to get the kids back to school. Some of the young people started working, and now there's extra income coming into the home. And mom has to wrestle with, do I send my child back to school and lose that income that's coming into the house? Or do they stay at home don't get the education, but they continue to bring the revenue back in. Unfortunately, some of them settled for the latter. And many of our young people are not in the school system, and we're spending a lot of time now trying to re-engage. Truancy remediation looks totally different now. It used to be where we had these truancy officers that would go out door to door. You heard how violent it is on the news in Chicago. Do you think people are going to go door to door now in Chicago, knocking on doors? Or do you think people are going to open the door to someone they don't even know, a stranger? And you're coming to my door to talk about truancy, remediation? What are you coming to give my child as an incentive for them to come back to school? Because I just heard about a kid being killed the other day walking home from school. I'm just sharing with you some of the things, the paradox, right? The qualms that our families have as it relates just with sending their children to school. It's a challenge. Then, and on top of that, we got the transportation issue, which is a national issue where you don't have bus drivers. And so the church has stepped up, and this is where, so if your church got a church van and it's just sitting there collecting dust, I tell you, here in Chicago, it could get put to use. And so many of our churches are now using their church vans to pick up students to get them to school. The mentorship, I talked about that. So now I want to get into the presentation for you, because that work that I shared with you as it relates to the Office of Faith-Based Initiatives with Chicago Public Schools, I was actually doing that work before I went to Chicago Public Schools. When I found out that only 2% of those young people were from that school that was congruent to the church where I was serving, I asked Pastor, I said, is it okay if I begin to go and spend some time at the school down the street? And he said, sure, I don't have a problem with that. So I started going to the school, being present, and just letting people know who I was. I let them know that I worked with young people at the church. I told them at our church, we had a gymnasium. We had this wonderful youth program. And I began to have young people flood our church and to be a part of our youth programs. Now, they didn't join the church, but they were a part of the program, which let me know that evangelism, where for years, evangelism looked like, okay, you got to invite people to come to church on Sunday. For me, evangelism was never about inviting people to come to church. Evangelism was about me bringing good news to somebody who was in need of some good news. If you're having a bad day, don't tell me that I need to come somewhere. What can you bring to me? So it started out with me first, say this with me, knowing the land. Just say it, say knowing the land. And those of you online, if you don't know anything else, you need to know the land. What do you mean by know the land? Well, it starts with, number one, this identification phase. The identification phase, I call it this, is because you're identifying everything that's congruent to your ministry that will be a mutual benefit. And what I mean by that is you reaching out to that school becomes a mutual benefit because, one, you are able to support that school, support the school families, the children there. But watch this. When you're talking about sustainability for your church and you're wondering why young people aren't there, oftentimes we go after the teenagers because we feel like they're easier to work with. But how many know that when you go after elementary school kids, you also get a chance, an opportunity to reach their younger parents? And I'm telling you about, this is something that worked for me. When I did this identification phase, I found out that not only did we have a school that was nearby where the young people weren't coming to our church, we had young people who were in a school that did not have an arts program. I am a fan of the arts. And we had this play that we were working on called The Wiz Remix. And I told my pastor, I said, Pastor, if I can get 30 young people to be a part of this play, I guarantee you this church will be packed on Sunday morning. And the pastor looked at me and I don't know that one pastor that doesn't want their church packed on Sunday morning. And he said, sure, have at it. So we began to do this casting call. Parents are bringing their kids to the church to rehearse and audition to be a part of this play. And I didn't care if they could act or not. I just wanted them to be in that play because this was my philosophy. If I was able to get 30 young people to be in that play, I knew that that was at least 5 people per kid that was going to come to see that child perform on that Sunday morning. And I tell you, grandma came, auntie came, uncles came, mama and daddy came. That church was filled to capacity, all because during the identification phase, I was looking for opportunities to serve and not for opportunities to just get people to come to the church. I went out, looked for these young people to be a part of something that they could feel like they were doing something significant, and they were. They were in the Wiz, and the Tin Man, I had 2 Dorothys, and I tell you, these young people, they had the ball of their lives. But then there's this information phase. So, and this is all about understanding the territory and where you serve, because a lot of times we have this broad way of thinking where we gotta take the city, we gotta get this entire city. No, you gotta work with your block. And on that block, you have some stakeholders. You have some people who, they may not have children in that school now, but they may have had some young people in that school years ago. So they still have a vested interest in that school. And when you begin to speak with them, what I would do is I would go out the same way I went to the schools. I would go to the residents and I would ask them what they knew about the church. And some of the responses about the church, they're like, oh, it's like a country club. You know, I see it all the time. It's this big building, but I've never been in there. Then I said, well, what can you tell me about the school down the street? You know, it used to be more students there, but now it's not as many young people there anymore. Well, what do you think the problem is? Well, they don't invest into the school. This is now giving me information for me to take back to my pastor to say, you know what would investing into the school look like? Investing is not always a monetary investment, right? Investing sometimes is just, it's time, it's your talent, it's your treasure. When I brought back to the pastor that not only did they not have an arts program in the school, but there was nobody, and when I say nobody, there was absolutely nobody that was coming to that school to spend time and invest time, talent, or treasure into this school. When we began, just me going and showing up to that school, it spoke volumes to that principal that someone was thinking about them. And how many know that some people just want to know that you're thinking about them? How many people you ever called someone and they told you, I was just thinking about you? And you're like, yeah, right. You didn't call me. You didn't send me a text message. How do people know that we're thinking about them? So then to let them know that we're serious about this, there's this initiation phase. I've identified opportunities to serve. I've gathered information. What am I going to do with it? Now it's time to initiate something. Now, those of you online, and I'm going to pause probably after this particular slide here before I go to the next piece. But what good is it if we gather information and then we identify these opportunities, but we don't initiate anything that's going to be a blessing or a benefit to that school? Now, and I'm telling you all of this. This was done before I joined the school board as the director of the Office of Faith-Based Initiatives. And I'm saying this because you don't need to have a position or a title in the school system to do this work. You just have to have the mind to do it. What we initiated was a fine arts program, not at the school, but at the church. And in that program, when those young people would get out of school, because not everyone is an athlete, right? Not everyone is looking to do they can do homework at home. So they're not looking to do homework when they get out. but they want to be a part of something fun. That's what began to build our arts program. And parents were bringing their kids left and right to be a part of this arts program at our church. It's the first part of this, which is called knowing the land. Just look at somebody and ask them, do you know the land? Online. So Mary is assisting us today. Online, do we have any questions, any comments that we need to address?
We had one from earlier, which was during the safe haven portion. Someone was asking, asking, how does someone fund, like do you pay people to coordinate your safe haven program? Is that all volunteers? Who staffs those things for y'all?
It's a wonderful question. So, and they probably asked that question before when I omitted to say that there's compensation for that program. So that compensation, and I did this when our church ended up becoming a safe haven site. And I needed to get a worker because I couldn't do this by myself, right? These kids were coming left and right. So I hired a young lady who was in school for early childhood education. And I thought this would be a good fit for her. And when she came on board, I realized that I had to compensate her for the work. So we stretched that budget out, and I paid her like $100 a week, which was not a lot of money, but it was something. And after a while, I realized that I could probably get some high school students who don't want to be with the little children and give them some leadership roles. So it becomes, it's like a ministry. For us, it was a ministry at the time because this was before the Safe Haven program when we first started doing the arts program. But when we became a Safe Haven vendor, the work that we did had to be secular. So we could not use any religious materials, anything like that. So the arts program worked when we were able to tailor the production, because the first production was, the tenets were more spiritual, religious. But we began to work on more secular productions, and the compensation was drawn out of the Safe Haven compensation that we receive. Some portion of the monies from the city. There's a huge grant that the school district would receive. Some of that money comes from the city, and then the school district puts in an additional amount. And so that's how the Safe Haven program runs. Any questions in the room so far before I keep going? Is any of it making sense? Yeah, I see some the heads nodding and thumbs up. All right, let's keep it moving, and let me know how we are on time. Great, okay. So after you know the land, this is what was key for me as well. Owning my lens was key. And I know it's spelled wrong on here. And this is intentional because I didn't understand about, and probably our tech guy in the room knows this, but, and for anybody who's a photographer, but the camera I thought was the most valuable piece of that particular device, right? Or if you got a cell phone now, everyone is a photographer now because we have a cell phone and we got cameras on it now, and we can make movies and all these good things. But how many know that the most important piece of that camera is the lens? But if the lens is blurred, if it's dirty, I don't care how good the camera is and how good that lens is, the picture is going to come out obscured. It's going to come out not the way you intended it to be. It's kind of like those of you who take selfies and you take 1,000 of them before you get the right one. And you're like, what in the world is going on? You know, I got to get some good lighting in here. But what happens oftentimes when churches, and I've seen this happen a lot with the church where I was, when we would go out into the schools or go out into the community, we wanted people to perceive us a certain way. And we were not authentically ourselves. And so what we brought into the community was this a facade. And I'll tell you this, I'm not ashamed to say it. We had this idea of going out in the community one day to pick up the trash in the community. But the ministers, they came out and they took some pictures, but none of them were picking up the trash. They were just watching. But I'm gonna tell you, there were some people in the community that was taking pictures as well. And I kept saying to myself, I hope they don't get pictures of these ministers that's out here not picking up the trash and just standing out here. It helped me to understand that when I come out in the community, to not forget who I am, to not forget where I've come from. And when I do that, I'm owning my lens. If I'm not owning my lens, I'm not going to hear properly. So the question that I ask people when they're telling me that they're going out into the community, I ask them, what have you heard? What are you hearing? During the pandemic, a lot of people were saying that, well, you don't have faith. If you're not going to church, you're afraid to go to the building because you think you're going to get the virus, then where's your faith? I said, well, the last time I checked, the Bible says that faith comes by hearing. And what we ought to be hearing is the good news or the word of God. So it's not about me seeing people going into the building or coming into the church. But what is it that I've heard? One of the things that I kept hearing, the more I spent time at that school, the more I spent time in the community, I kept hearing over and over and over and over again, people saying, no one came to see about us. This was from the residents and this was from the school. No one came out. No one came to see about us. No one deemed us to be essential. Have you all heard anything where you serve that was disturbing? Anything that triggered something in you that just made you say, you know what, I got to do something different? I asked this question here, what have you heard? Because if you haven't heard anything that's disturbing, that just stirred up your spiritual equilibrium and just jacked it all up and just made you rethink and reimagine how you're doing ministry, then maybe we're listening to the wrong people, the wrong things, and we're not listening to God. And when I say listening to God, I tell you, if you really want to hear God's voice, the best way to hear God's voice is to listen to young people. And when those young people, when they started coming to that arts program and they started telling me about the teachers in their school, they started telling me about their home life, and some of it I'm like, telling me too much. I don't need to know about your mother this way and about your dad this way, because I don't want to look at them differently. But young people will authentically, genuinely tell you what's going on, what they're dealing with. Why? Because that's the only lens that they know. And when that lens that they know, that's what they're looking through. They're looking through what they've experienced. They're looking through what it is that they felt. They're looking through what it is, like Maya Angelou said, people, you may forget what people have said. You may forget what people have done, but you will never forget how they made you feel. And these young people, the way they listened was by how they were being treated and how they were made to feel. And so the more I heard them, the more I wanted to be intentional with making sure that they felt safe, that they felt heard, and that they felt loved. What have I seen? Right now in Chicago, I tell you, there's not a day that goes by when I'm out working in the school district where I see something that just makes me shake my head. And the story I was sharing with you all about the young boy yesterday when he was walking home from school and was shot. He took a route home that was different, or it was peculiar, because it was almost like he was taking the wilderness, the way through the wilderness to get home. But it really wasn't a wilderness, because he was walking down a more affluent block, a neighborhood where you had more upper class families living in this particular block, but he himself lived in a low-income development. But he got killed on the block that he didn't live on. What I concluded when I was talking with the principal is that this young man was perhaps trying to take a safe route home. But while taking that route, whoever was looking for him, they came down that street and they killed him. This is something I didn't see it happen, but when I see the news, I'm seeing it happen. When I see a young person that's afraid to go to school, I'm seeing it happen. When I see a mother who is taking her children to school and she's praying with them, and you see her nervously getting back into the car because she's just praying that she'll see her children again when school lets out and when they get back home. These are some things that I've seen here in Chicago, and where you are, you may have seen some things that may be inspiring you to say, you know what? I have to own my lens and understand that I bring something to the table. There's an experience that all of us in this room have that has shaped us to do the work that we're doing today. What have you heard? What have you seen? But what will you do? What will you do? Will you allow the news to continue to speak louder than the good news that you carry? The last time I checked, this was it's a lot of Presbyterians in the room here. So there's some church folk in the room. And for me, my pastor used to always tell us, he said, you know, we don't come to church to do church. Because a lot of people, we had church down packed before the pandemic. We knew how to have some good old church. A lot of our churches here in Chicago, I mean, we could have some church. You didn't even have to have an organist. If you had somebody that could make a joyful noise unto the Lord, you're going to have some good old church. But what happens when you can't have church in the way that you used to have church? And now you're at home in the pandemic. You're online. How do we have church? Well, it's not about having church anymore. It's about being the church. So what will we do? A better way for me to ask this is, who will we be? Who will you be? When I did this, I began to grow my village. My network began to grow right in the community where I was. And that's why I titled this next slide, Growing Your Village. Look at someone and just tell them, grow your village. If you're online, just type it in the comments. Grow your village. Grow your village. Now, I didn't hear you all in the room say it. Just look at somebody and tell them, grow your village. Grow, yeah, there you go. Grow your village. What do you mean, grow your village? I have this little map here, and you see all of these street signs. You see community names. You see names of school, a police station. If you look closely, you'll see all kinds of things. I don't know how many of you have ever done it. I know you may use your GPS to get around. Some people need to use the GPS just to get from home to the grocery store. I don't get it. Like, really, you know how to get to the grocery store. But when you look at that map, and I've done this before, I'm telling you, you do this, you're going to be surprised what you see. You will start seeing some landmarks and some establishments that you didn't even know existed. Even in I don't care if it's just a mile radius, you look at that map, you begin to see all of these things. When I did this before I came on board to the school district, but even after I came on board, when I was working in another part of the city that I wasn't that familiar with, which was the west side of the city. And anybody from Chicago, anybody else from Chicago, I know it's one person from Chicago. Anybody else from Chicago? Well, if you've ever encountered a West Sider, and this is good information for those of you from out of town. If you want to know what the best side of Chicago is and you're talking to a West Sider, you tell them it's the West Side. When I was on the West Side working, I told them, I said, it's the best side of Chicago as long as I'm on this side. But when I went back to the South Side, white socks all day, South Side, that's who I roll with. But when I was on the West Side, I didn't know that much about the West Side of Chicago. But I'm in this role where I'm responsible for working and servicing the entire school district. But they housed me on the West Side of Chicago. I looked at a map and I began to look at all of the establishments in this one community called the Austin community. And there was this one establishment that I saw that I always heard about, but I never frequented. I never had gone to visit. It was called MacArthur's Restaurant. MacArthur's got the best soul food in the city of Chicago. And I won't tell you otherwise because they're on the west side. But I said, okay, I got to get in touch with MacArthur's in order for me to do this work. So I'm sharing this with a colleague, and they're like, why MacArthur's? I'm telling you, I need to get to MacArthur's. I wanted to get to MacArthur's because it was a popular restaurant on this west side. And my mission at the time was to grow my village. But everyone likes to eat, and everyone likes good food. So I knew that if I went to this restaurant, I probably would set myself up with an opportunity to begin to meet some key people or stakeholders that I need to know in this Austin community right there in that restaurant. But how did I find that restaurant? I looked at a map. And that's why, number one, I wanted to create a win. In church, I know we know that God will bless us with God's grace. And, we want something. We have these grandiose ideas and these things that we really want to do. But how many know that a win is a win? I don't care how big or how small it is. So I had to learn, even though I was thinking big, I wanted to execute small. So I wanted to create a win. I knew that if I went to the restaurant, that it would set me up that even if I only met 5 key people, that's enough. That was a win for me. When I went to MacArthur's and I had a conversation with the owner, with Mac, we call him Mac. Mac told me right out the gate, he said, Alan, I want you to come to a business meeting that's held in the Austin community every 4th Thursday of the month. And at that meeting, I'm going to allow you to present and for people to meet you. This was all from talking to the owner of this restaurant. I go to this meeting. They allow me to speak and introduce myself. This is on the west side of Chicago, so I didn't tell them I was from the south side of Chicago. But I told them what I was doing with Chicago Public Schools. And they all had the same look that you all had when you heard about Office of Faith-Based Initiatives. But they understood that this was an invaluable work. And all of them, they vowed to support me and to help me in whatever way I needed to do that work on the west side of Chicago. I was creating a win. But then I wanted to model this win. What I mean by modeling the win is, I use this when I deal with leadership and branding, right? I always like to name, if a ministry is coming up with something, a new initiative, I like to name it. And I like for us to then model it. And the modeling sometimes looks like, wearing the hat. So like for APCE, I've seen some people with the APCE mask on. That's modeling the brand, wearing the brand. But when it's something that's not tangible and it's a work that you're doing, how do you model it, right? So what I began to do was set up these opportunities to create wins and opportunities for villages to grow, where not only did I want my village to grow, but if you were working in the Austin community and you had another organization with another mission, I knew that you still needed your village to grow. So what I would begin to do is the same way that Mac had these business meetings every 4th Thursday of the month, I ended up having a collaborative meeting every 2nd Tuesday of the month, where I would invite parents to come to this meeting. I would invite faith leaders to come to this meeting. I would invite elected officials to come to this meeting. I would invite everybody I knew to come to this meeting, because at that meeting, people had an opportunity to grow their village. Oftentimes, our villages don't grow because we're so concerned about growing our village, but we don't want to model it so that other people can grow their village. If your village grows and you're connected to me, my village can't help but to grow. And I don't know if it's like this in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Tampa, I think is in the room. But in Chicago, churches can be very competitive. And what we have here in Chicago, you have a lot of, one of my friends, he likes to say it, resaved church members or recycled church members is probably the better way. So we get mad, we don't get an opportunity to serve at this church, so then we go to the next Presbyterian church down the street. And we're wondering why the village isn't growing, because we're not modeling growing the village. In order for my village to really grow, I had to stay planted in that Austin community. Even though I wasn't from the West Side, I had to stay there, spend my time and put the time in, going to places like MacArthur's Restaurant, visiting churches on the West Side, spending time and setting up meetings with people of other faiths. But I wanted to model the wins. But I wanted to expand the wins. And this is what has happened for my work with Chicago Public Schools. When I first started, there were over before I started, there were over 100 churches that were a part of this Safe Haven initiative. Well, because there was some oversight, overpayment, and some other stuff that happened, they dismantled the office. When I come on board, we had to implement this new process for churches to become a Safe Haven vendor. So I became the bad guy. You're talking about churches responding to an RFQ, and none of you all kind of looked at me funny when I said this, but most churches in Chicago, when you mention an RFQ or trying to apply for a grant, they don't have the business acumen to do it, but they're doing some good work in the community. So when you roll out this new procurement process, it knocked a lot of churches out. They didn't want to respond. They were intimidated. I was tasked with this responsibility of expanding the program. Alan, we want you to expand the Safe Haven program. I'm like, do you all understand that these are churches, not businesses? And you want them to respond to an RFQ process? So we started out with 12 churches, literally 12 churches. I guess it was divine. We had 12 churches. From that 12, I began to use all of this, the creating the wins, modeling the wins. I used those 12 to say, hey, you know what? We need more churches in this program, not for the district's sake, but for our young people's sake. And that's kind of the way I do my work. I'm not trying to meet a quota or check off something on the list. I'm always trying to do something where it should make sense. The Safe Haven program, to me, it made sense because it gave these young people a safe place to go, an alternative to hanging out with the gang members or going to somewhere they have no business going. So these 12 churches began to hold these collaborative meetings. And at those meetings, they would invite churches that was in their organization that they were affiliated with. And at those meetings, I was able to go and present and talk about the Safe Haven program, talk about Adopt a School initiative, talk about crisis support. And from there, it began to expand. Today, that was 2017, we started off with 12. Now we have 47 Safe Haven sites around the city of Chicago, serving over 20,000 students via the Safe Haven program. The next goal now, I'm trying to get it to 60. But we started small, but now we've expanded. This was my long way of telling you guys that if you want to make that essential impact on your communities where you serve, the city where you serve, the number one thing you need to do is just first, know the land, own your lands, and then grow your village. When you say it like that, it sounds so simple. But then when you look at all those other pieces that was done with each one, that's where the work comes in. And to be honest, it's hard work, but it's a rewarding work. Because now when a principal reaches out to me or I get an alert about a young person that was shot and killed. And I think about how that young person, perhaps if they were in a safe haven program, if that young lad who was on his way home had a safe haven to go to and not have to worry about walking down the street, trying to navigate the streets of Chicago, but a safe place to go, he probably would be alive today. Because to date, we have not had one student that was a participant in the safe haven program to be lost to gun violence or any other type of violence. So it works. I want to end there and open it up for dialogue, questions, comments, and concerns. I think we'll address the online viewers first.
Okay, so there were lots,
Okay.
but I'll give you a few. I think I can stick some together. Some of these questions come from persons who are working in churches that are in more of a suburban environment.
Mhm.
And so some of the questions were with the schools that are close to those churches, how would you begin to start knowing the land and finding the greatest need in a more suburban
Yes.
environment?
Mhm. It's a great question. So, the social ills are going to vary, right? Depending upon the context, the social construct and context. But in the suburbia, young people are young people and they're going to have similar problems. All of our young people are on social media. We got babies are coming into the world now already with Instagram handles and Twitter accounts. But one way to do it is to come up with a survey, right? I didn't talk about this, and I didn't do this till later on. And this is just when I wanted to become a little bit more sophisticated and because you want to have you want to have metrics and you want to be data driven at times, right? So I wanted to have data to to help me get the budget that I wanted for this work that we were doing. So I created a survey, a little Google survey, sent it out to the schools. One, to find out what were the top needs that they wanted to have met at their school. Then I sent a survey out to the churches. The survey to the churches was to see what were the top social ills that they could address. When I did this survey, I discovered that both the school and the churches were so much aligned in what it was that they needed. Most schools said they needed mentorship. They said they needed some wraparound services. And some of them said, and all of them said the trauma piece when I sent out this survey. The churches, when they responded, said that they could do mentorship. They said that they were able to do some trauma responsiveness. And then they said that they were able to do some like after school programming. So when you do that and you have what it is that what they need, you go to them not telling them what you're going to do. And this is what I get on some of my church buddies here in Chicago, because when I first started working with a group here called Together Chicago, the number one word they kept saying was transform. We want to transform education in Chicago. We want to transform. And so I told them, I said, if you want to go and meet with the CEO, please don't use that word. Tell them you want to support the school district of Chicago Public Schools. So it's all about support. Once you hear what it is that they need, now it's up to us to see if we can meet that need. If we can't, it's okay to say we can't do it. We can't meet those needs, but this is what we'll do. That principal is like a little CEO of their school. I don't care if it's in the suburbs or in the city, but they have a vision for that school. And for us to come in as an outsider, I think it behooves us to just want to help them execute that vision in some way or another.
One other one was a person that's in a city where they have a police department for their school district. Mm-hmm. And so they have their own building and their own staff, the police department does. Question about kind of how to go about, or should they go about reaching out to that, to the police department in the school, and how might they go about doing that? That's
a wonderful question. That's if I was to make this boring presentation even lengthier, I would talk about working with the police districts in Chicago. I don't know how many there are. There's at least 20, there's over 22 districts. And I only know that because 22nd district is one of the districts that I work with. But in Chicago, each of our police districts has a faith-based component. They have these faith-based meetings. And so I try to attend those meetings. And in those meetings, you begin to see the difference between these police districts. On the west side of Chicago, where there's probably the least investment in the community out of any other community in Chicago, they have the most wonderful model for community policing in the 15th District Police Station. They not only do they do the faith-based meetings, but they go out in the community. One of our commanders, he was one of the first, when he first became a commander, I met him at that meeting I talked about that on the west side of Chicago. He had just become a commander of the 15th District. I met him in that same day. And that gentleman, people knew him by name. He would go door to door. He would canvass the community. He was in the schools. So I would just say, call your local police district, tell them who you are, tell them what you do. And they're looking for friends. I have friends, policing is an issue, right, in our country. I wasn't one of the ones that subscribed to defund the police, because the defund the police was just a slogan that sounded good to me. And it was because when I would get in meetings like that at the police district, and preachers with these, you always say that one preacher that's just loud and they got the preacher voice, and we gotta defund the police. And I asked him, I said, well, why do we have to defend the police? I asked him privately. And this is when I learned that this was just a mere slogan for many people. But he said, because when you say defund the police, that's more radical, and we need radical change. So I said, so we rather sound radical rather than do something radical. And I tell you, one of the most radical things that we had in our school district is that the 15th District Police Station, when we had what's called SROs, security or safety resource officers in the schools, they weren't going around arresting people. They were just being present. They only came out of the room, out of their little cubby hole if something happened. But the students knew them, the faculty knew them, but people felt safe with them being in the schools. And I tell you, I wouldn't want to be a principal in a school that's in a high crime area without that security in the schools. But the police districts is one of the, if we're looking to create community policing models in the cities where we serve, we have to work with the police department. We can't make them our enemies. They have to be our friends. We need them, but they need us as well. Yes, I saw a hand back here. Yep. So what I would encourage you all to do, if that school board, if they have public participation hearings where you can go and present what it is that you want the board to, because usually the board will have to vote upon whatever it is that you're presenting, right? So what I would do is begin to get other faith leaders behind the idea where in Tampa, or where you live, and plan to go to one of those public hearings and let them see that you got support, and not just from the faith community, but get some parents behind it, right? Where they can hear that we need these other services, because, and you want them to see that it's going to be a benefit to the education system, because the teachers, when they're done teaching for the day, they're ready to go home to their family. So we don't need to put more on their plate. We don't need to put more on the school, on the school's plate. This is a way for us to take something off of their plate and to perhaps help those young people in that academic experience, which will lead to academic progress. And I guarantee you, the board If they say that they don't, want to support anything like that, then you don't need to be a part of that board. But I think that they will hear you. They just want to hear that you've thought it through and that you have support and that other people are going to get behind it. And let them know the third largest school district is doing it in our nation, and it's working. But I would start there. Online. Oh, got it. So can you repeat the question for me? Right. Yes. So the question is this common or uncommon to have an Office of Faith-Based Initiatives with the school district? So under the Bush administration, the U.S. Department of Education, they deemed it permissible for churches to be able to work with school districts, right? So in the CME faith, so the CME faith has this model called one school, one church, or one church, one school. So it's a national initiative. Now, during that time, there was a lot of money flowing, the economy was different. So a lot of these churches, they were getting a lot of money to do programming and support school districts around the country. However, many of them, they weren't supporting school districts. They were getting money, but they weren't supporting the school districts. That's my long way of saying that it's not necessarily uncommon, but what is uncommon is the actual support to the schools. If you go online and do a search for faith-based initiatives in any school district, you go to Detroit, you can look up in Ohio, Dayton, Ohio, Cleveland, you will probably find something. But the next step would be call the number. And these are things that I did. You call and you ask them to give you some information about it. Nothing is being done. Nothing is happening. And I think it speaks volumes. And to me, it was disheartening because it let me know, it was confirming the idea that I had that we had become comfortable with being insular. And so while we're insular, we don't go out to the schools. And Chicago, I think I was mentioning with someone earlier today that we've experienced a mass exodus from Chicago, period, which means that it's going to impact the school district. So a lot of people are saying now that we may be on the verge of becoming the fourth largest school district and no longer being the third largest because people are leaving. But how do you keep people engaged? It's through that community engagement, going out there, knowing who people are, knowing the village, and intentionally trying to grow the village. That's how you keep people engaged. And the same thing applies to our churches. Some of our churches have experienced a mass exodus due to the pandemic. And now we're trying to get people to come back. I know you're having coffee in church at home, but, come back to the building. And they're like, really? God is here with me too. So it's not uncommon, but what is uncommon is the actual work being done with the schools. Any other questions?
Is it on? Yeah, sorry. Is Safe Haven is it your program? So it's only here in Chicago? Is that a national program? Is that?
Yes, Safe Haven is, from what I know, is only here in Chicago. The question is Safe Haven only relegated to Chicago? Is it in other school districts? I think now, because I have some friends in New York, they're looking to try to do something similar. And then also in LA, they're trying to do something similar. But every city is different. New York is totally different from Chicago with all the bureaus. So I don't know how they're going to make it work there. But most cities have the same, a lot of churches where, like Chicago, we have churches right next door to each other. So you go down a street here called Halsted, from all the way from north to south, you will probably see at least 5 churches on every block, right? So now if all of those churches were to become a safe haven site, what happens? They all end up competing for the same young people. So one of the things that I wasn't too taken aback when we once had 100 safe haven vendors and then we had to dismantle, because some of those sites, when they were up and running, they didn't have children in those sites. Because here it is, they're right next door to another safe haven site competing for the same young people, but young people are going to go where their friends are. They're going to want to go where it's fun. I will say this, the school district, when we give them the food to eat, they do get a meal at these at the Safe Haven program, but oftentimes it's what they call choke sandwiches. I thought I would get a few chuckles there. If you've ever had a choke sandwich, it's an awful, pitiful sandwich. But when you love young people, you want to do a little bit more. So some sites would end up doing pizza. They would get hamburgers. So you're going to one of these other sites where you're still getting just the choke sandwiches. I need to go where they're giving out the pizza and the hamburgers too. And so those sites end up getting more children, and the other sites, they end up failing. So now looking at those key areas, and that's why knowing the village, knowing the land rather, is key, because you want to reach those young people, whether it's in the suburb or in the city. You want to be able to go to where the greatest need is. So even in a suburb, there's a part or area in that suburb that has the greatest need. And that's where you want to probably set up that's where a safe haven site will work best.
You talked a little bit about how you've moved into the community and gotten people to buy into it, but there were some questions on what happens when there is pushback from parents and from the community. What are communities with limited resources or places that won't even entertain any relationship with congregation and school? How do you suggest people move into that?
Yes. So interesting enough, I haven't had any pushback as it relates to this work, because you're not asking them for something. You're telling them that this is for them. And most parents, whether they have resources or not, they don't mind something extracurricular for their young people, especially if it's free 99, right? When it's free 99 in Chicago, I tell you, people, as long as it could be the worst thing that you could ever have for them, but because it's free, they want it. And I tell you, it'd be more people at this conference here if they knew if this conference was free, they would just want to come because it's free. But the only pushback, now I did have pushback before I came on board to the district. And that pushback was because of the church and the stigma that the church had in the community, that it was only a country club and that they wouldn't fit in when they came there. So I had to work hard to just make it welcoming for them when they came. So I had to work with the staff that was there. And I asked the staff, I said, hey, when these people come to this church, I don't want us running anybody away. If anybody gets ran out of here, I want it to be us. I want them to come in and run us out of here, because that's what we're here for. The church is for the community. And, I was happy to say that when they came to the church, we made them feel welcome. And they were there for that period of time that we had those programs up and running in the church. So.
And I don't think I have any others other than they have asked, would you be willing to make your slides available for people? And
Sure.
We'll work on
Absolutely.
that. Great.
I saw a couple of hands. Yes. Mm-hmm. So all of them worked in a singular fashion, right? So I think so the question is, were any of the sites that's in partnership working in a singular mode, like by themselves? Oh, one site in multiple locations. Okay. So multiple partners. So do we have any sites that have multiple partners but one location? Oh, so working together, coming together, but facilitating it or hosting the program in that one particular site. That's the question. Got it. I believe there is one site because they have multiple churches. They are at one church, but they have like these multiple locations around the city. But the one site where they have the amenities, where they have the gymnasium, they have this cafe, and it's just state of the art. That's where they do the programming at. But all of those churches serve so they're all feeders into that one location. You can certainly partner. So the way it's set up, if there's someone else who has a better facility, but you may have the workers. You may deploy the workers to the site, but they're using their facility to host the program. That can work. We also have some sites where the church has a CDC. So you have the church building, but then they have this CDC that's attached to the organization. And the CDC is where they do any other programming that's outside of the ministry work that they do. And they partner with some other churches and organizations. And let me say that we work with nonprofits, other nonprofit organizations as well. So it's not just faith-based, but a nonprofit organization. And whichever way is going to be the best way to serve those young people, that's what I recommend. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what will take care of it.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So the question is, what do you do if you have those who are hypersensitive as it relates to sharing the gospel? And it has to be, we got to share the gospel. We got to preach Jesus, especially if you come, my context is where it's Jesus only church, right? If you're not saying Jesus, like you got to say Jesus to really be a Jesus follower, right? Well, the school district is diverse. So there are people of other faiths. So you probably will have to spend some time just you may have to do a Bible class on evangelism. What does 21st century evangelism look like today, right? Are you able, just simple questions, are you able to evangelize without saying Jesus is something that I've done before, right? Are you able? And some people couldn't. They don't know how to do, they just because of, it's just what they've always practiced. And we oftentimes say practice makes perfect. No, it can make permanent if you practice in the wrong thing over and over and over again. So I spent some time teaching it. So when you're trying to brand something, a ministry, you got to teach it and educate people as to why they're doing it. A lot of churches, it was hard for them to do it. So even from the board side, when I would do the workshops, we would do what's called safe haven informational sessions. And in those sessions, I would ask this question. I would say, how many of you all in the room have ever prayed, God, please send me a harvest? And everybody would raise their hand. And then I would say, well, I don't want to debunk your theology, but I don't care what faith you subscribe to, especially those who subscribe to those faiths that are very agricultural in its tenets. You will not read in the ancient text anywhere where God sent a harvest. Now, what you will read in scripture is that God sends the rain. And as a result of the rain, the harvest will manifest. But what's the caveat? Somebody has to go out and do the harvest thing. And that's what a lot of people don't want to do. It's easy for us to go and just hit somebody over the head with scripture and say in Jesus, But when you got to actually go out and model Jesus, then it becomes hard because young people can see right through you, and those who haven't been in church and they've been educated by the streets of hard knocks, they can see right through us, and people don't want to model. We just want it to be easy for us, but God never said it was going to be easy. He sent the disciples out into the harvest to do the harvesting, and that's the same thing that we have to do today. Welcome. Yes. Yeah. Yes. So the question is, if you have to deal with your bureaucracy in your local church and trying to get the buy-in from the pastor, is how I understand it, as it relates to you doing this work, the time that you're going to put in, to get that support. And what does that support look like? Which probably is what you're asking too, because is it going to be monetary support, or is it just going to be a pat on the back and say, go get them, soldier? My pastor, and I left out a whole lot of what else I do in the church and did in the church. All I did was create more work for myself. I was already an assistant pastor. I was already working with young people. I was already part of the Feeding the Homeless ministry. I was already a part of, we had a brotherhood ministry where I was a facilitator. I was already going out, like, remember I mentioned going to the schools before I got the support from the pastor. But once I realized that this is something that could be serious, and I wanted to get the pastor's support for me doing that in order for them to come back to be a part of the program, I got the pastor's support, verbal support, but there was never any additional monetary support for me. It was really just the pat on the back. However, when he saw that the program worked, that the arts and the fine arts program was working, and we needed things, right? You just need stuff. You need to get costumes. You need to feed the families when they're there. And this is all apart from the Safe Haven program. That's when they began to invest in the youth ministry, because in most churches, and there's several books on this, youth ministry usually has the smallest budget, right? And for many, it's an afterthought. My mindset is that, when you're talking about the least, the last, the lost, and the little, that should be the first thought, not the afterthought. So the only thing I can encourage you to do is, if you're trying to get the buy-in from the pastor and it doesn't look like what you want it to look like, you have to know or be certain with the fact that this is something God is calling you to do. And I do believe, though, that if God is giving you the vision to do what you're doing, God will give you the provision. It'll come some way, somehow. So and this is where Safe Haven came in, where I didn't get the resources from the church to do the work. This Safe Haven program has been an answered prayer to a lot of churches, because that compensation was coming from this governmental program and not necessarily from the church. So they were able to put that into the budget because you know how much you're going to get from this program, and that helped offset some of the costs. Yes. All you Floridians. Mm. Yes. So the question is about the young people having a safe way home. And if they're in the program, how do we get them home safely then? So I will say that in the Safe Haven program, you're going to get primarily elementary school kids. So elementary school kids, they're not walking by themselves. Someone is bringing them and someone is picking them up. They have to get parental consent. For them to even be in the program. And so we train the workers, anybody who's working the Safe Haven program, we train them on things like being mandated reporters, but we also train them on just being able to interact with those guardians, those who are responsible for picking up and dropping off those young people, paying attention to who they are, knowing who's picking them up. They got to sign out. Who is it that came and picked up Johnny today? We want to know who it is. We want to be able to go back and look if something happens. Johnny didn't make it home, but who picked Johnny up, right? So that's one of the measures that we have in place. Also, some of the sites provide transportation, right? So if you have the capacity to provide transportation, we do admonish that because the safety and the health of our young people, that's the number one priority for our school district here in Chicago. Yes. I got to remember to repeat the question. So the question is, do we have a breakdown of the demographic makeup in the Safe Haven program, whether they're like middle schoolers, preschoolers, junior high? We don't necessarily have the breakdown, a specific breakdown, but we look at the schools from where they come from. So that's how we do the makeup. So are they coming from elementary school? Are they coming from the high school? And that kind of lets us know. You're going to get the elementary school kids mainly because the high schoolers have so many extracurricular activities in that school that they can be a part of. And many of them, because they feel like they're grown, they don't want to go to something that seems it's for kids anyway. Unless, like I mentioned earlier, if they have a leadership role, they can be a part of the program. So you can sign them up to be a part of the program. But while they're there, you're giving them a leadership role to work with those young people, and it helps them mature in their leadership capacity. But it also helps you to meet your quota. Like if you're trying to have 20 students be a part of your program, you have 18 elementary school kids, and then 2 of them are high schoolers, but the high schoolers are helping you with those young people. But that's usually how the makeup looks with the Safe Haven program. I will say this, I'm working on something now to have more technology involved that we may roll out as a pilot. And we learned this during the pandemic when we were trying to do the remote learning hubs, but we want to set up these technology hubs is what I'm calling them. But the technology hubs is what I envision the young teenagers being able to come to. They can check out iPads, they can work with all things, the Apple products, and do STEM activities and things like that, because not every young person goes to a STEM school. So through the Safe Haven program, we want to be able to create access for all students. So you're solving an equity issue where now you create access to STEM and STEAM activities via the program. Yes. Yes. So the question is, can I speak to a more wider congregation serving other ethnicities in that congregation? And we have several of those. We have, there's this one church, is predominantly a white church, but they serve predominantly African-American students. And I tell you, I grew up in a Black church, a small Baptist congregation as a kid. My church didn't have anything, but there was this other church that was nearby, had a white congregation, and but they had everything that I desired to have in a church. They had the gymnasium, They had structure, they had order. And so I'm saying this to say is don't look at that as a barrier. Look at that as a benefit. What you have is a blessing. It's how do we use that to benefit those who may not look like us? And it's the other way around, right? If it's a Black church, but you have white children coming to your program, right? How do we benefit them? And I'm a strong proponent of understanding that in the kingdom of God, if we're really kingdom, it means that we're able to get along with those that don't look like us, that don't think like us, that don't believe like us. All of this is a part of the kingdom. And in the Safe Haven program, I think better than anything else, it really mirrors the kingdom, because you may have in your church somebody who is Muslim. That's a part of that program, but the parents feel comfortable allowing them to come there because they know that you're not going to proselytize. You're simply going to have a safe space for them to engage in some productive activities. And so they're okay with them going to your church, even though it's not a mosque. All right, I don't know if are we at time?
We're close to it. One last question is, have you written a book, and what is the title?
So I am working on a book, and that's interesting that they asked that question. I shared that. Were they ear hustling earlier? I only shared with one person. I am working on a book. It's a working title, but I'm looking at calling it Dominionology, a 21st century look at community. And not to give all of it away, but I challenge us to rethink that word dominion, which is found in Genesis chapter 1, around verse 26, where it talks about God giving us dominion over the earth, right? But you Bible scholars in here, some of you have studied it, and you know that Hebrew word for dominion means to tread upon like a wine press. So when we say that, we have to ask the question, if we were made in God's image, then our dominion in the earth should look like God's dominion. So the question would have to be then is, what does God's dominion look like in the earth? Well, certainly I don't believe that God treads upon God's creation like it's a wine press. But I believe that I mentioned earlier that God is relational. I believe that God is responsible. I believe that that God is all things community, but what that looks like is what I wrestle with in this book. And it's a 21st century look at community, and it's challenging us to look at that word dominion in a more appropriate way and biblical way. So stay tuned, pray for me that I get it done.